The desert outside Los Angeles is quiet, save for the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades slicing through the night air. It's just after midnight on July 23rd, 1982. Arc lights flood the set, turning sand into silver. Smoke machines churn. Explosions are prepped. Crew members shout over one another, adjusting lenses, checking marks, tightening harnesses. This is supposed to look like chaos, but it's carefully choreographed chaos. Controlled. Safe. At least, that's the idea. Actor Vic Morrow stands in the water, holding two children in his arms. The script calls for him to run. The helicopter is meant to hover overhead, low and dramatic, but never dangerous. Explosions will erupt behind him, timed to the second. Someone calls, "Action!" The blasts go off, but something is wrong. The fireballs rise too high. The shockwave hits harder than expected. The helicopter begins to wobble. A split second passes, then another. The aircraft dips. The tail rotor clips an explosion. The blades shatter. The helicopter drops out of the sky like a falling star. The cameras keep rolling. In the aftermath, there is silence. Then screaming. Crew members run toward the water, slipping in mud and blood. Somewhere, a director is shouting. Somewhere else, someone is praying. 3 people are dead, and Hollywood will spend decades arguing over whether this was an accident or something far darker. History is more than just dates and names in dusty books. It's a shadow stretching across time, full of secrets, tragedies, and whispers that refuse to die. This is Morbid History with Thomas Gloom. When the Twilight Zone, the movie, was conceived, it was meant to be a celebration. The original television series, created by Rod Serling, had become sacred ground in American pop culture. Short morality plays about greed, fear, power, and consequence. The film adaptation would update those themes for a modern audience, helmed by some of the biggest directors of the era: Steven Spielberg, John Landis, Joe Dante, and George Miller. It was prestige horror, big budgets, big ideas, and it would end in one of the darkest chapters in Hollywood history. The segment that went too far. The disaster occurred during filming of the opening segment, directed by John Landis. The story centers on a racist man who is transported into the past and forced to experience persecution firsthand. First, as a Jewish victim of Nazis, then as a black man facing the Ku Klux Klan, and finally as a Vietnamese civilian during the Vietnam War. The intent, Landis claimed, was moral transformation. The execution, however, was reckless. The Vietnam segment required explosions, gunfire, and a low-flying helicopter to simulate a war zone. And at the center of it all was Vic Morrow, a respected actor known for tough guy roles, and 2 children, Micah Din Lee, age 7, and Renee Shin Yi Chen, age 6. Here's where the story turns ugly. The illegal truth. California law strictly regulates child actors, especially when it comes to night shoots, water scenes, explosions, and aircraft. So the production did something it never should have done. The children were hired illegally. They were paid in cash. Their parents were told not to inform authorities. They were filmed at night, in water, with explosives, all conditions explicitly prohibited by law. Why? Because the studio didn't want the hassle, and because the shot, quote-unquote, looked better at night. Vic Morrow reportedly expressed concern on set. He questioned the safety of the scene. Crew members were uneasy. The helicopter pilot warned that the pyrotechnics were too intense and too close. But filming continued. Because in Hollywood, schedules matter. Budgets matter. And once the cameras are rolling, stopping costs money. The moment everything failed. On the night of July 23rd, multiple explosions detonated earlier and more violently than planned. The helicopter, already flying dangerously low, was struck by a fireball. The pilot lost control. The aircraft spun, dropped, and crashed directly into the shallow water below. The main rotor blade struck Vic Morrow and Micah Din Lee, killing them instantly. Renee Shinyi Chen was crushed beneath the helicopter's skids. All three died on camera. This wasn't metaphorical horror. This wasn't cinematic illusion. It was real death, captured on film. Hollywood reacts and deflects. The industry reeled. Production was shut down. Investigations were launched. The footage was locked away. Lawyers descended. Public statements poured out, heavy with words like tragic and unforeseeable. But behind the scenes, blame shifted rapidly. John Landis insisted the accident was unavoidable. Warner Brothers distanced itself. Safety procedures were called industry standard. Families of the victims saw it differently. They sued. And for once, the legal system didn't just shrug. The trial that changed Hollywood. In 1985, John Landis and 4 other crew members were charged with involuntary manslaughter. It was unprecedented. Directors were not criminally charged for on-set deaths. The trial lasted nearly 10 months. Prosecutors argued that Landis knowingly violated child labor laws, ignored safety warnings, and created conditions that made the deaths inevitable. The defense claimed the crash was a freak accident. Witnesses testified about pressure to complete the shot, concerns dismissed by leadership, and a culture where speaking up meant risking your career. In the end, Landis and the other defendants were acquitted. No one went to prison. But Hollywood had been shaken. The fallout nobody likes to talk about. After the trial, changes quietly took place. Safety protocols tightened. Child labor laws were enforced more strictly. Helicopter stunts became rare. The phrase, "after the Twilight Zone incident," became shorthand in production circles. And publicly, Hollywood moved on. The film was released. Audiences watched it. And many couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Because once you know what happened, you can't unknow it. Is this a curse or a pattern? Some fans call it the Twilight Zone curse. They point out eerie parallels. A film about moral reckoning ends in real tragedy. Actors punished by the very chaos they were portraying. Death arriving mid-scene, mid-transformation. But Morbid History isn't about superstition for superstition's sake. And as your host, it's my stance that this wasn't a curse. It was hubris. It was the belief that art justified risk, that spectacle mattered more than safety, that the rules were flexible if the shot was good enough. Rod Serling's Twilight Zone warned about exactly this kind of thinking, about men who believed they were immune to consequence. And in a grim irony, the film adaptation ignored the lesson. Why this story still haunts Hollywood. The Twilight Zone tragedy lingers because it exposes an uncomfortable truth. The scariest stories aren't haunted. They're actually avoidable. 3 people died, not because of fate or evil or supernatural forces, but because multiple adults made choices and refused to stop. No curse required. Just silence and momentum within a system that rewards finishing the scene at any cost. And maybe that's why, decades later, this story still feels wrong. Because somewhere in the desert, under those arc lights, the Twilight Zone stopped being fiction and became history. Before we get to our second main topic of this episode, let's take a brief tour and discuss a few other infamous Hollywood productions that didn't go according to plan. The Exorcist, 1973. Few films have ever unsettled audiences like The Exorcist. But what many don't realize is how much chaos surrounded its creation long before audiences lined up around the block. During production, a mysterious fire broke out on the soundstage. It destroyed nearly the entire set. Walls, ceilings, equipment, everything except one room. Reagan's bedroom. The fire delayed filming for weeks and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix. Crew members began whispering that something was wrong. Director William Friedkin, known for pushing realism to its breaking point, only leaned in harder. He fired guns on set to shock actors. He slapped performers to provoke genuine reactions. He subjected cast members to extreme cold to capture visible breath on camera. Then the deaths began to accumulate. By the time the film was released, 9 people, yes, 9 people connected to the production had died, including actor Jack McGowran and actress Vasiliki Villieros. Some deaths were natural, others sudden. All were noticed. Before the filming concluded, a Jesuit priest was eventually brought onto the set to bless it, something Friedkin initially resisted, then quietly allowed. Now, none of this proves a curse, but it does reveal something else. The Exorcist demanded suffering in pursuit of authenticity, and that suffering didn't stay contained within the frame. The film became a cultural lightning rod, causing fainting, panic attacks and claims of possession among viewers. The line between performance and belief blurred. Whether haunted or not, The Exorcist left scars on its cast, its crew, and its audience. And sometimes, that's enough to feel cursed. All of that, dear listener, is part of why I, personally, recommend the book more than the film. It's one of my top 3 favorites of all time, with the other 2 being Stephen King's Pet Sematary and Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart. What? Are you shocked that I prefer literature of a darker variety? Poltergeist, 1982. Poltergeist is often cited as one of the most cursed films in Hollywood history, but its reputation rests less on superstition and more on disturbing choices made behind the scenes. During filming, real human skeletons were used in the infamous swimming pool scene. The decision wasn't artistic. It was financial. Real skeletons were cheaper than plastic replicas. But, and Sir Mix-a-Lot would be very proud because this is a big but, most of the cast didn't know the bones were real. Then, things turned tragic. Shortly after the film's release, Dominique Dunne, who played the teenage daughter, was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. She was 22. Then came the death of Julian Beck, who portrayed the sinister preacher Cain in Poltergeist 2. He died of cancer not long before the film's release. The most haunting loss came later. Heather O'Rourke, the child star and face of the franchise, died suddenly at age 12 from complications related to an undiagnosed intestinal condition. Her death shocked the industry and permanently altered how audiences viewed the films. 3 deaths, 3 actors, 1 franchise obsessed with the boundary between worlds. There's no evidence the skeletons caused anything supernatural, but the symbolism is unavoidable. A movie about restless spirits was literally built on the remains of the dead. Poltergeist didn't just tell a ghost story. It invited death onto the set, quietly, cheaply, and without asking who might pay the price. The Crow, 1994. On March 31st, 1993, actor Brandon Lee stood on set preparing to film a simple shot. A character was meant to fire a gun loaded with blanks. The weapon had been checked, or so everyone believed. When the trigger was pulled, a fragment of a real bullet lodged in the barrel from an earlier scene was propelled forward by the blank charge. Brandon Lee collapsed. He died hours later. The parallels between the film and reality were impossible to ignore. The Crow is about a man violently murdered who returns from the dead to avenge his death. Lee died portraying a character obsessed with justice beyond the grave. Production halted. Cast and crew were traumatized. The film was eventually completed using stand-ins and early digital effects. Unlike other cursed films, there's no mystery here, no coincidence, no superstition. This was negligence. And yet, the emotional weight of the loss transformed The Crow into something else. A memorial frozen in time. Brandon Lee became eternally young, eternally mid-performance. The tragedy reshaped industry safety practices, but only after it was too late, at least for Brandon. Some films are remembered for their impact. Others are remembered for who they took with them. Rosemary's Baby, 1968. Rosemary's Baby doesn't carry its darkness on set. It carries it forward into the real world. The film, directed by Roman Polanski, explores paranoia, betrayal, and the violation of domestic safety. It ends with the birth of something monstrous. 1 year after the film's release, Polanski's pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, was brutally murdered in their home by members of the Manson family. The crime shocked the world. Suddenly, a film about unseen evil invading a safe space felt prophetic. Audiences retroactively read the movie through the lens of real horror. Tate's death reframed everything. The film itself was not dangerous to make. There were no deadly accidents, no lightning strikes, no explosions. But history rewrote it. Rosemary's Baby became inseparable from what followed. Not because it caused violence, but because it proved how little warning horror gives before it enters real life. Sometimes the curse isn't production. It's timing. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Francis Ford Coppola once said, "My film is about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." And it nearly destroyed him. Filming Apocalypse Now was a logistical nightmare. Typhoons destroyed sets. Actors dropped out. Lead actor Martin Sheen suffered a heart attack mid-production. Coppola mortgaged his home to finish the film. He later admitted he contemplated suicide. Real war footage bled into staged chaos. Live ammunition was present on set. Filipino extras were sometimes actual soldiers, recalled mid-scene to fight real conflicts. The boundary between movie and reality collapsed. The production lasted over a year, far beyond schedule. Cast and crew endured physical and psychological exhaustion. Coppola later said he lost control entirely. Apocalypse Now wasn't cursed by ghosts. It was cursed by obsession. A director trying to capture madness by living inside it. And the cost was nearly fatal. Fitzcarraldo, 1982. If Apocalypse Now was psychological warfare, Fitzcarraldo was physical. Director Werner Herzog insisted on absolute realism. His film required hauling a 320-ton steamship over a mountain in the Amazon jungle. He refused miniatures. He refused special effects. Indigenous laborers were injured. A worker lost a foot. Another was bitten by a venomous snake and amputated his own leg with a chainsaw. Actor Klaus Kinski clashed violently with Herzog, who later admitted he once considered killing him and claimed local tribes offered to do it for him. Herzog pressed on. The ship was dragged over the hill. The film was completed. But at what cost? Fitzcarraldo stands as proof that obsession can be more dangerous than superstition. No demons required. Just ego, endurance, and the refusal to stop. Greetings, dear listeners. Thomas Gloom here. I'm stopping by to share two brief things. One, if you are enjoying this podcast, please consider sharing it with someone you know. And also, leave a review. Whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or somewhere else, leaving reviews helps to promote this podcast and get it before new potential listeners. Let's grow this thing together. Also, depending on where you listen, you might be able to leave comments on episodes. I would encourage you to do that. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm open to feedback. The second thing is that I have been active on TikTok. I'm posting 2 videos a day and plan to do so into the future. So search out Morbid History Pod. The profile image is the same as the podcast logo. Find me there. Back to the show. When coincidence becomes a curse. If The Twilight Zone, the movie, is a story about negligence and consequence, then The Omen is something stranger. Because nothing catastrophic happens on a single day. No single moment explodes into tragedy on camera. Instead, The Omen leaves behind a trail of near misses, freak accidents, and deaths so eerily aligned with the film's imagery that even hardened skeptics found themselves unsettled. Not because Hollywood wanted a curse, but because once people started noticing the pattern, they couldn't stop seeing it. A film about the Antichrist. Released in 1976, The Omen tells the story of a diplomat who unknowingly adopts the Antichrist as his son. The film leans heavily into Christian apocalyptic imagery, prophecy, divine judgment, violent death delivered as punishment. It was bleak. It was serious. And it took itself very seriously. Director Richard Donner was not a believer in curses or supernatural interference, but even he would later admit that the production felt different. Not haunted, not possessed, just persistently wrong. Lightning strikes, again and again. The first incidents were easy to dismiss. While flying to England to begin filming, actor Gregory Peck's plane was struck by lightning. Unsettling, but not unheard of. Then, on a separate flight, producer Mace Neufeld's plane was also struck by lightning. Then a third lightning strike occurred, this time hitting a plane carrying screenwriter David Seltzer. 3 separate flights, 3 separate lightning strikes, all connected to the same film. At that point, the crew joked nervously. Someone reportedly quipped, "Maybe we shouldn't be making this movie." No one stopped production. The hotel bombing. While filming in London, Gregory Peck stayed at a hotel that was later bombed by the Irish Republican Army. Peck had checked out just hours earlier. The explosion did kill and injure those who were present. Again, coincidence. But it lingered. Especially when paired with another incident involving special effects expert John Richardson. The decapitation that felt too familiar. John Richardson was responsible for one of The Omen's most memorable deaths. The decapitation of a character by a pane of glass. Months after production wrapped, Richardson was involved in a car accident in the Netherlands. His girlfriend, Liz Moore, was killed instantly, decapitated by the crash. As Richardson crawled from the wreckage, dazed and injured, he noticed a road sign nearby. It read, Omen, 66.6 kilometers. The coincidence was so specific that Richardson later said it haunted him for the rest of his life. This wasn't a vague parallel. This wasn't symbolic. It was a mirror image of the violence he had helped stage on screen. A zoo that went silent. Another strange episode occurred during filming at the London Zoo. As Gregory Peck and his wife toured the animal enclosures, used as filming locations, animals reportedly became agitated. Lions roared, monkeys screamed. A handler claimed the animals had never behaved that way before. Later in the film, a scene shows baboons violently reacting to the presence of the Antichrist child. The connection is thin, but the timing was eerie enough that crew members whispered about it. The death of the stuntman. During filming of a scene involving Rottweilers, a stuntman was attacked and injured. He survived, but soon after, Paul King, the animal trainer responsible for the dogs, was killed in a separate incident when he was mauled by a lion at another facility. Again, no direct connection to the film's set, except that it was another violent death orbiting the same production. The weight of pattern. By now, the story begins to feel familiar. Lightning, explosions, decapitation, violence tied to animals. None of these incidents prove a curse, but taken together, they form something psychologists call pattern recognition under stress. When humans are exposed to repeated trauma, especially trauma linked to symbolic imagery, we begin to connect dots that may otherwise remain separate. And the Omen was saturated with symbolic violence. Why the Omen felt different. Most films have accidents. The Omen had accidents that echoed its themes. That's the difference. A romantic comedy actor's plane struck by lightning wouldn't inspire fear. A courtroom drama followed by a decapitation wouldn't feel ominous. But a film about divine punishment, prophecy, and death? Every incident felt like a message. And messages invite interpretation. Richard Donner's perspective. Director Richard Donner later said that he never believed the film was cursed. But he admitted something else. I've never been on a production with so many things going wrong in such bizarre ways. He described a sense of unease, not fear of demons or Satan, but the sense that the film demanded a psychological toll. Cast and crew began attending church more often. Some wore crosses. Others joked darkly about being protected. Humor, after all, is how people cope with dread. The role of belief. What makes The Omen such a compelling morbid history story is not whether it was cursed, but why people needed it to be. The 1970s were saturated with apocalyptic anxiety, Cold War dread, cultural upheaval, declining trust in institutions, a resurgence of interest in prophecy and the occult. The Omen didn't create that fear. It tapped into it. So when strange things happened, audiences were primed to interpret them through a supernatural lens. The film didn't summon the devil. It reminded people how close chaos already felt. The curse that lives on. Even today, The Omen is regularly cited as the most cursed film ever made. Not because of body count alone, but because of how closely reality seemed to echo fiction. A movie about violent destiny followed by violent coincidence. And once that narrative took hold, it became self-sustaining. Every accident became evidence. Every death became confirmation. The curse didn't need to be real. It only needed to feel real. A morbid reflection. Unlike the Twilight Zone tragedy, the Omen did not kill through negligence. It killed through association, through proximity to trauma, through the human tendency to search for meaning in randomness, through our discomfort with coincidence. And maybe that's why it still unsettles us. Because if the Omen isn't cursed, then what does it say about the universe that all of this happened anyway? History doesn't need demons. Sometimes it just needs timing. Hollywood loves the idea of a curse. It's comforting, in a way. A supernatural explanation means no one is truly responsible. No one chose wrong. No one pushed too far. But when you look closely at these stories, at the Twilight Zone, the Omen, the Exorcist, the Crow, Apocalypse Now, Fitzcarraldo, a different truth emerges. These weren't haunted productions. They were pressured ones. They were built on tight schedules, fragile egos, unchecked ambition, and the belief that suffering was a fair price for greatness. Somewhere along the way, safety became optional. Boundaries blurred. Warnings were ignored. And when tragedy followed, we reached for the word curse. Because it was easier than saying someone should have stopped. Cinema is illusion. It convinces us danger is pretend, violence is controlled, and death can be edited out. But history doesn't cut away. The camera may stop rolling. The consequences don't. They linger in courtroom transcripts, memorial plaques, unfinished careers, and the quiet knowledge that some stories were paid for in blood. Maybe the real curse of Hollywood isn't that films summon darkness. It's that we keep pretending darkness is worth the shot. This has been another episode of Morbid History. I'm your host, Thomas Gloom. If this episode made you look differently at the movies you love, or the stories behind how they're made, leave a review and follow me on Instagram and TikTok for more tales from the shadows of our past at Morbid History Pod. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, dear listener, history can be a lot of things, including morbid. Just let anybody make a film these days.